Hey everyone, it's Spicy Sushi. So over the past week, I've been playing Last Epoch on my Twitch channel. It has been a pretty interesting experience since this is my first time ever actually playing the game. I went in completely blind, and it is not like a normal game launch at all. Or it was not like a normal game launch at all for me. Instead of like normally people asking like, how did you get past this point? Where was this person? Or like, where was this certain vendor NPC? It was more like everyone had already figured out the entire game, it felt like, and I was pretty behind. So I've been doing a lot of catching up. I have like 40 hours so far in the game at this point, and the most common question I'm asked is, how does this game compare to Path of Exile? Because I am a PoE content creator. I think 99.9% of my content is all PoE related, and so therefore, like, all of my community is Path of Exile players. And so I think what would be like the most helpful video that I could make on my channel for you guys is, how does this game compare to PoE? Not just like a rating them side by side, but more like a what would you like as a Path of Exile player about this game? What could you look forward to? And maybe what things would you not be interested in? And so that's what I figured it would be appropriate to do. We'll do 3 different chapters, I think, for this video, 3 different aspects of Last Epoch that I think are most comparable, that being leveling, well, more like character progression, leveling all the way to monoliths. We'll go over crafting, which is the part of the game that I liked the most. I really, really did enjoy the crafting in Last Epoch, and so we're going to dive into that for the majority of the video. And the last aspect that we're going to touch on is going to be in-game, mainly going over my first impressions of it, and as a PoE player, like maybe what you'd enjoy about it and what I would like to see probably added in the future. Because so far, this game does sound like it's going to get a lot of updates. I think the Last Epoch devs released a news update today going over that there's going to be a lot of like pinnacle content added, as well as cycles every 3 months apparently, which a cycle is like a Path of Exile league. And if you play Path of Exile, you know there is a lot of content that comes with leagues. I'm not sure if they're going to try to be at that same level, especially since this is a buy-to-play game and doesn't have like constant MTX that's like PoE does. But it is looking really promising, and so I will definitely keep that in mind when we get into that. Now, my first impressions with character progression in this game is that it's very, very easy to experiment, and it's pretty much inevitable when you make a branching skill tree for every single skill in the game. Like, this isn't just like increased damage, more AoE. A lot of them are nodes that completely revamp how the skill behaves as a whole, kind of like transfigured gems in Path of Exile. There's nodes that completely convert the damage type, like suddenly instead of scaling chance to bleed, we're scaling chance to poison. Change how the skill behaves as a whole, like instead of like shooting the projectiles in front of you, they're now going to be rotating around you like a blender. There are a lot of choices, and it's inevitable that people are going to want to experiment, unless I guess you're like following a build guide exactly. But even if you're following a build guide like I did, I didn't really like the leveling skill that Warlock had. I think it was Rip Blood, and so I respect like Hungering Souls, and I liked it a lot more, so I played with that for a while, and then I could easily respec to something else. Now, I'm pretty sure you can't actually respec your mastery, though. This is kind of like an ascendancy in Path of Exile. Once you've chosen your mastery around level 20-ish, I'm pretty sure, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to be stuck with that. Now, the game makes it very easy to re-level a character. There's campaign skips. You can actually jump straight to the end-game system, being monoliths in this game at like level 30. And so getting your passive skills, your idle slots and stuff is just really fast on your second characters. So this isn't really an issue. I am kind of surprised that they didn't allow you to respec mastery, but maybe since it's so easy to just experiment in general, this is like the one thing that they want you to actually be locked into, I guess. And so the general vibe that I've gotten from the developers of LE is that the difficulty in the game is not so much supposed to be with the content itself, outside of like the Giga in-game empowered monoliths, which we'll cover in the in-game section. More so, the difficulty is supposed to be with decision-making that the player has to make regarding their character and their build. Like, what skill am I going to use? How am I going to scale it? What uniques am I going to use with it? Like, how am I going to make all of this work? Because you have a lot of choices. You have your uniques, you have your rares, you have your skills, your skill trees, your idols. There's a lot of choices that the player has to make, and it's pretty obvious that this is supposed to be the main difficulty of the game, because the campaign itself and monoliths are actually really, really easy. Until you get to like the Giga endgame. You could quite literally just pick up items off the ground and play a skill with use like general like logical thinking when it comes to scaling it, and you will probably get to endgame. Now, if you're the type of player that really wants to play the meta because they want to be ahead of the curve, they want every decision they make to be optimal, you're not really going to get like some sense of accomplishment or satisfaction until you get to like Giga late game when you're pushing really high corruption in monoliths, because those decisions that you've made, that build you've chosen is really going to shine around there. If you pick something like suboptimal because you just want to mess around and have fun, it's not really going to punish you early on. And in my opinion, this is actually pretty fun. It was kind of a breath of fresh air because things are drastically different in Path of Exile. Even in PoE, if you follow a build guide, because I'm not going to cover if you go in blind, because that is usually a disaster. But even if you follow a build guide, there are a lot of walls that you will hit if you don't have a lot of experience beforehand going into this, because leveling in PoE even is kind of an art. It's designed around having a solid loot filter, looking at a vendor, following the build guide, and making sure you're doing the correct vendor recipes to keep your damage scaling throughout the campaign. Usually even build guides have leveling setups, which is a completely different skill than the main one that you'll be using for a long time, like 8 to 10 plus hours, and even into like yellow maps sometimes, which is not the end game, but it is like the introduction to end game. You might not even be using your main skill. And I feel like when a lot of players burn out is when the leveling skill that they use starts to fall off really, really hard, and they have to swap over to the real skill. There's usually a lot of check boxes that have to be done. Like, do you have your bow with at least like 1 essence mod on it? Do you have the bench crafts required? Do you have at least some decent 2 4 links or a 5 link? And if you don't meet these check boxes, things are going to feel pretty awkward. And these requirements are definitely very hard to meet for a newer player. And so I feel like that's where PoE kind of falters when it comes to new player experience. Now, what do I prefer? I actually do prefer Path of Exile when it comes to this, although I do enjoy the experimentation that LE offers. PoE is just kind of, I wouldn't say it's like an elitist perspective, but I do really enjoy how the sense of accomplishment, of satisfaction you get for like following the meta, or not even really following the meta, but building a really strong character. You feel very rewarded very early on. And I think this mainly comes from the fact that PoE is a very multiplayer focused game, unless you're playing like SSF. There's a very, very large and a very active economy. So playing in something strong and developing multiple leagues of experience with the build that you're playing, to where you know the ins and outs, you know exactly at what stages, at what levels to switch to certain things, when you should collect various items or get them off of trade, or like what you should craft, at what's the first thing you upgrade, what's the second thing you upgrade, what's the third thing you should upgrade in the build to overcome the content that you're currently dealing with. All of these things add up to make it a really, really fun experience when you put time into that in a multiplayer environment, because you're going to be ahead of the curve. You're going to be able to farm more currency than other people faster. Your time that you've spent is just it feels more rewarding. And I feel like the reason this is a thing is because PoE just has so many layers of in-game content at this point, where players kind of like to just skip all the early stuff and get straight to the in-game content as fast as possible, because there's like a lot of different choices to choose from, and maybe you've like picked a certain build to do something like better than another build. For example, like you've chosen a Sanctum farmer, and that's like your entire end game. Like you just want to be a Sanctum farmer for a week plus, farm a lot of currency, then go to bossing, and then after you've done some bossing, you might want to switch to heisting. That's just kind of the result of when you've created a sandbox for players. The fundamental question that you're asked is not so much what build do I want to play, like what skills do I want to use. A lot of the time it's more so what content do I want to do in the game, and that might influence like the decision making you do with your build. Or if that's not the fundamental question you're asked, like if you're a newer player and it's more so like, I'm just going to pick something that's fun and what I want to do, you are unfortunately going to hit a lot of walls, right? Like let's say, man, I just really liked how Caustic Arrow looked, because I don't know, I just like bow builds, I like poison, so I decide for my first Path of Exile playthrough, I'm going to do a poison bow build. Well, you might get to Sanctum, which is a piece of content that you're like, I actually kind of want to try this out. It looks pretty fun. You're going to realize your build sucks, right? Because it's a dot build. It doesn't have a lot of damage early on, like not a lot of front-loaded damage. You're going to get blasted. And there's no really change for that, to be honest. You're just going to have to go try something else in the game. And then you might switch with that build and go over to maybe farming heist, and you're going to be like, I'm a little bit too slow for this. This is like pretty painful. So I'm going to go try Legion. Oh wait, I can't even clear half the Legions right now. So I guess I'm just going to stick to what the guess, like what the actual build recommends for this, which is just like doing essences and farming harvest. But you might hit a wall and you might be like, I'm not really enjoying any of this. I kind of want to do that other content. And that's kind of where the decision making starts to take place for a player on PoE. It's like, I need to actually probably pick a build that's good for the content that I actually want to try out and have a good build for, right? While in Last Epoch, there just isn't really that setting yet in the game that's been put in place. You have the campaign, you have monoliths, you have empowered monoliths, with, you know, corruption, and then you have arena. And that's just kind of where like you stress test your build in the maximum end game. And so the question really for that game is more so just what do you want to do, right? Like what skill do you want to use? What build do you want to play? How do you want to scale it? You know, it's more like a sandbox in the sense of your character, because the devs have provided you such a massive amount of options. And I feel like the end game will definitely progress over time, like we will talk about later. But does that mean that the Pathofexile player base is not going to be compatible with the Last Epoch player base? Like, no, like it's absolutely not mutually exclusive at all. For example, I could definitely see a Pathofexile player who's not happy with the lack of flexibility that you have when it comes to endgame, or just character progression in general, not enjoying how a certain build just can't do a lot of content, and they might just want to move over to Last Epoch where they can do all the content with their build, right? They may like Last Epoch more in the sense of, while it doesn't have as much in-game content, I have way more flexibility with the build I want to play. I can do all of the content in the game with you know, my minions and skeletons, whereas I couldn't do like half the league mechanics in Pathofexile with my minions. So this is a lot more fun for me, right? So I do think that's where character progression differs quite a lot, but I do think there are a lot of things to enjoy about both. So while I do prefer PoE, just because it's way more complex in the ways that I've described, I do like Last Epoch a lot because it's really a sandbox in terms of character building. And so that's all I'll probably go over in character progression, since there's a lot to talk about with crafting. All right, so the first section that I was really looking forward to getting into is the crafting, and it is the section that I feel like I've gotten the most questions on about how I feel about, like how do I like Last Epoch crafting? Do I think it does things better than PoE? And so I'll go ahead and get into that. Now, the crafting in Last Epoch, I would give it probably like a 10 out of 10. It's probably the 10 out of 10 aspect of the game, and I enjoyed it quite a lot. And it's not just because of how much agency it gives you in the early game. You know, Pathofexile, in comparison, you don't really get to craft until like the late to mid game. If you're like an SSF, if you're in Trade League, you have to probably drop a pretty valuable item until you can actually start crafting. You'll go through the entire campaign and maybe have like a few scouring orbs. If you convert all of your chance orbs or something, you could maybe have like 10, 12. You'll have a few essences, but in general, in PoE, you're supposed to play a league starter that can function on basically no gear at all, like maybe maximum 1 to 2 modifiers, and you can't really get more than that early on. If you do, it's pretty lucky. You know, leveling in PoE has kind of become an art because it's really about having a finely tuned loot filter and being quick to go to items from the vendor, you know, and in any time that it's efficient where you level up and you're in town, you're supposed to go through the vendor because you can get like a 4-link, you can get modifiers that you need, and this is a really massive point of frustration for a lot of new players because you just don't have that kind of skill set. You don't know to get like a finely tuned loot filter that's going to show you exactly what you should pick up and identify. You're not going to know to go to the vendor and look for, you know, good items when it's efficient. Like, trust me, as someone with over 10K hours, I haven't really practiced this part of the game enough, I feel like. And so I do have leveling runs where I'm just like, man, I have no gear. I am so unlucky. I have nothing. But the reality is I've just not been efficient about checking vendors. I've not been efficient with killing essences to be able to get, you know, this early gear. And on top of that, you're really supposed to pick a league starter. If you want to have the smoothest time possible, you're supposed to really pick a league starter that functions on nothing until you get to the mid game when you can really start crafting. Because if you don't, things are going to become pretty awkward, right? You know, it really does make PoE overly complex in a way that I feel like it doesn't really have to be. Because once you finally get to ROG, you're like, oh, I suddenly go from no items to having like 5 mod, 6 mod items on every single slot if I need it. It's honestly kind of surreal having that massive jump. Whereas in Last Epoch, you really can just make whatever you want on your items pretty early on, depending on if you have the affix shards. Now, Last Epoch's not really a hard game like PoE. You really don't need to do this. you could get all the way to in-game model-list with just picking up items off the ground, I believe, and then you getting uniques, because the game's really just not hard enough. But to be honest, it's fun. It's just straight up more enjoyable when you can do that. If you want to go poison, go bleed, you can just craft chance to poison or bleed on the things that you need. If you need a certain resistance or you need life on your gear, is probably what you're going to need more than anything else. You can just craft life on your gear. And I don't think it has to be that easy in PoE, but having some form of crafting to balance out the massive jump that you go from being able to do nothing to just suddenly making like really good items when you get to like something like ROG later on, or getting a lot of essences, or being able to buy crafting materials, etc., etc. I feel like it's something that the game could really use. And, people are going to say, oh, this is unnecessary. I mean, it doesn't make sense in PoE, but, the reality, like, the reason why a lot of people say that is because they're just so trained and used to just playing builds that just don't need that they don't really think about it. It was enjoyable. I don't think it would make PoE too easy, because PoE, like, once you reach the point where you can ROG, where you can buy gear off trade, where you can, get infinite crafting materials, this really is a non-issue. It would really just smooth out the early game. I think it would result in a lot more diverse league starters. For example, if you could make like a good bow for LA a lot earlier rather than just throwing one essence. Oh, I guess LA's not lightning arrow is not a good example, considering you could literally put a deafening wrath essence on a bow and it would be good enough for end game maps because of how just absolutely absurd the build is at this point. But there's like a lot of crit builds, a lot of spell builds that things could be a lot easier. You wouldn't have to have such a high reliance on unique items or playing skills that are just extremely strong from the start. Those builds would obviously get a lot stronger if things were made more deterministic, but I don't really see that as an issue, considering like once you get to the mid game, they're already going to be insanely strong either way. But anyway, that's my thoughts on the early game crafting. But Last Epoch actually has a whole another type of crafting, which is the end game crafting. And this is a type of crafting that I feel like is more unique than any other ARPG that I've played, and I think it's pretty awesome, and I hope that PoE introduces it in some way in a future league mechanic, just to see how the community feels about it, because I think it would be very exciting for me. And what I'm talking about right now is crafting with legendary potential. Now, when a unique item drops, it can have a chance of dropping with something called LP, legendary potential. And what this allows you to do is to take a rare item and grab a 1 to 3 to possibly 4 modifiers at random and slam them onto your unique item. Now, it's very hard to get higher than an LP of 1 or 2. 2 allows you to choose 2 mods at random, 1 mod at random, etc. And I think this is honestly really awesome. Now, the game doesn't really have pinnacle content yet to where it would be necessary to get more than like 1 LP. It's not even really necessary to get an LP or to even slam 1 mod over, but it just makes the game more fun, in my opinion, because it really takes things to another level. Considering, like, I'll give you some examples. There's like a unique that when you stack cold resistance, you get more ward, which is like kind of energy shield in this game. And so if you can like basically grab cold resistance on your items, or more than that, to just max out the defenses in your build. Obviously, this is applicable for damage as well. We can slam like T1 crit multi, crit chance, stuff like that. It is really an aspect of gearing that is pretty sick. Now, obviously, when you do this, you kind of make rare items irrelevant when it comes to equipping them on your character, because there's a lot of really strong uniques in this game, I've noticed. And so rare items eventually progress to a point where they're just used for crafting fodder for unique items. I've seen a few builds where you use some rare items on like jewelry and, a weapon. So I think this is still, this aspect of gearing is still applicable for certain builds and certain slots, but in the large majority, you're going to be trying to farm for uniques with LP and then crafting a good rare item and then slamming it onto that. And I don't think this devalues gearing at all, really. A lot of people, like ARPG veterans in the community, they prefer it when rare items are used in an endgame build rather than just slapping on uniques. And I think this comes from a distaste of Diablo 3 gearing, right? When you play Diablo 3, a unique item is a straight up upgrade above a rare item. Like, when you get a rare item, you're like, this is going to be eventually replaced by the most garbage unique in the game. For the slot, it'll just have higher base stats in general. And D3 is very dated in that aspect because things have gotten a lot more complex and a lot more cooler, since PoE has kind of set the standard for gearing. Grim Dawn has also been pretty good about it as well. I feel like this is a really nice twist, and I feel like PoE could maybe benefit from it as well. Now, people in PoE, the PoE community is very hardcore about rare items being good. I don't know. I think it comes from past leagues where crafting is much more deterministic than it is now. I honestly don't really care for rare items as much as I used to, mainly because GGG has really just slammed the nerf hammer down on rare modifiers. I think Eldritch Implicits are one of the main reasons why rare items are actually even relevant at this point. Influence mods are very dated. I bet if you asked a random person, they wouldn't even know like 99% of Shaper and Elder modifiers in the game. Probably not even Hunter, Redeemer, Warlord, etc. because we only use like a bare minimum of them, because as soon as you use a influence modifier, you are sacrificing Eldritch Implicits. So we see Shaper and Elder mainly for multi-link items, which are really, really cool, and I would never want that to be devalued. Because I think, multi-linking is super cool and a unique thing about PoE, but I feel like it does need to be revamped in certain aspects because we just don't really see influence crafting as much anymore. Actual crafting has devolved into just essence spamming, getting a fracture modifier on the ground, essence spam to something good, going to ROG to make like a 5 or 6 mod item. So I'm going to be honest, let's not even go into how much of a chore it is, honestly. It really, really is a chore. And people are going to think I'm just bashing PoE right now, but trust me, I have over 10k plus hours in the game. I've spent probably 6,000 of those hours min-max crafting. I've made hundreds of mirror items. I do, like, crafting is why I play PoE, but I have to be honest about it, right? Like, you can make so much money in a league for crafting, not because other people don't know how to do it, which that is a part of it, but it's mainly because people just don't want to bother doing it. Like, they will literally pay 50 plus divines profit margins simply because they don't want to put the time into doing it. It's just such a pain, and it's not because it would take hours to make the item, it's just because it's such a absolute pain to go buy all of the crafting materials and go get unlucky RNG, and so you're just hating the game, and you're like, I wish I just grinded and paid someone to do this, because determinism has really just been unnecessarily stripped away from the game. Items used to be a lot easier to make. Now they're just not. And I found myself enjoying mainly just ROG crafting. ROG is mainly the reason why I still enjoy crafting, because it doesn't feel like an absolute, chore. Honestly, I think a lead mechanic in PoE would be awesome to have this. There's a lot of unique items in PoE that are just dead right now, but they could be pretty damn good if you could slam 1 to 3 rare modifiers on them. Now, things would get absolutely out of control, but this is not really something we haven't seen before in this game. Leagues are really just meant for experimentation and meant to just take things to the next level and just make things absolutely absurd, in my opinion. And so I think this would be pretty awesome if PoE actually experimented with something like this. Like, I think a lot of reasons why people don't go low life anymore on spell builds, for example, is because it's just very hard to not get like one shot by most things in the game. But if you could take a Shavron's wrappings and throw like an extra 100 ES, throw some spell suppression on it, maybe some fizz damage reduction, it could actually be an item that gives you a lot of ES, like how ward uniques and Last Epoch give you a lot of ward. For deck stacking builds, slamming, like, there are a few deck stacking uniques, Fractal Thoughts, like if you could just slam T1 dexterity on that, slamming. I mean, there's probably like a million examples I could give, but I feel like things would get really interesting. Things would get completely out of control. Like Sentinel League was a league where everyone was just in a frenzy, didn't know what was going on because everything was just absolutely busted. And these are leagues that I think are the most fun in PoE for me. Now, I've already gone over 10 minutes just into the crafting, but to be honest, I didn't want to review too much about the game, so this is why I'm taking so long on crafting. I do want to touch on in-game content, though, so let's go ahead and go over to that. Now, in-game content, I only have 40 hours in the game, so I don't have a whole lot of experience with this, but I kind of knew what I was getting into from the previous videos I've seen about Last Epoch, about how the grind is mainly monoliths. Now, PoE also has a pretty repetitive end game as well. It really is just a lot of grinding, but it's a lot of fun grinding in my opinion, because PoE is a sandbox. Now, Last Epoch is not a sandbox yet. It could be, it has the foundation to become one, but it is a part of the game that is a little bit hollow at the moment because it is lacking a lot of customization. Now, customization in PoE is like sextants, scarabs, various lead mechanics that you can add to your map to make it more fun, to make grinding a lot more enjoyable. I think Last Epoch could do this as well. I feel like it's really not hard to follow in PoE's footsteps, not to copy them exactly in any way, but just to follow the formula that PoE has, and it just would work so well. And a lot of ARPGs just don't do this. I think D4 had the most potential, and they actually did a pretty good job at the start, but then they've really started dropping the ball, especially with Season 3. And what I mean by that is I feel like an ARPG end game, like the way you design end game, it really just comes down to stuffing as much stuff as you possibly can in without it becoming a chore and unfun to actually do. A lot of the time, this is making it optional. And if it's not optional, it really needs to be fun. And I'm looking at Helltides when I say this, because Helltides are not really optional, and they're definitely not fun after you do them a few times. I think ARPGs can be described as like an infinite ladder, like a ladder that you are just infinitely climbing, and it represents like the most basic grindy gameplay that an ARPG offers. And I feel like the job of developers is to just like kind of distract you from the fact that you're just doing the exact same thing over and over again. And as the more you become aware that you're just grinding and grinding and grinding with little gain, the faster you are going to burn out. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with an infinite ladder. I mean, this is why ARPGs are so popular, is because people love the infinite ladder, as long as it's fun, right? And when you have a sandbox like PoE, I guess the ladder in PoE you could probably call it maps, but since it's like a sandbox, you know, there's a different ladder for everyone, really. But there's just a lot of things that you can throw into a game to make it super, super fun and distract you from that, to where you don't really feel like you're just endlessly grinding and doing the most repetitive thing over and over, because you're just having fun while you're doing it. Now, with monoliths, there isn't really much else rather than just grinding monoliths, getting higher corruption. You know, dungeons are pretty cool, and I think that is, you know, a great first step in I guess we'll call it a distraction. In D4, I think Season 2 did a pretty good job at this. We have your Nightmare Dungeons, which is the infinite ladder. You have Helltides, which is how you grinded crafting materials for your items. And then with Season 2, we had the Vampire Side area, which was actually a really fun open world area where you would just farm absolutely insane amounts of like rare and unique items. And then Helltides were like, you know, like I said, the crafting materials, which honestly, I hate Helltides though. I really wish they had just moved the crafting materials over to the Vampire Side area. I think it would have been a lot better, but you know, either way, Season 3 completely dropped the ball though. It was not fun to do like the new little gauntlet like activity, I guess. The, you know, companion you get, not very much fun to play with. Not much to say about it. Stopped playing the league within like 3 days. I played Season 2 for like a week plus. I think it was actually a pretty solid step in the right direction. Maybe they pull together. Not sure how they haven't yet with the budget they have and the team they have, but we'll see, right? Last Epoch, they've already released a news post going over all of the in-game content that they plan, pinnacle content like PoE, and so I honestly have no doubt that they will do a lot better job than D4 did. And will it eventually evolve into something that has 10 plus years of content, to the point where it evolves into something of a sandbox? It's quite possible, right? Like, they already have an auction house, the Circle of Fortune, the Merchant Circle. I feel like these are really cool aspects of in-game that I haven't really messed with a lot. And I feel like they're really taking, you know, steps in the right direction, like I said, because obviously the end game needs to be expanded quite a bit. I feel like it falls off quite hard because it really isn't pinnacle content. There isn't a desire to min-max. You really don't need more than 1 LP. You don't even really need LP on a lot of items, because the game just is not that difficult. And even though, like, you could argue like, well, yeah, but if you want to get like 1,000 plus corruption, you need to start. But like, I feel like at that point we're diving into Diablo 3 territory, where it's like, yeah, but if you want to get like Greater Rift 150, you need to eventually, like, no one cares, right? At that point, if your game is getting to the highest possible corruption, that isn't an end game. Like, that isn't actually an end game in my opinion. Although it would be cool if PoE actually had something like that. I would not mind that at all if they added that some league, because I think it is pretty cool to have something like that, but I don't want it to be the only thing, is just infinitely progressing. And obviously, like, there is Arena, but it falls into the same category, I feel like, as corruption. It's just an infinite, you know, you are very aware of the infinite ladder at that point, that you're just doing the exact same basic grindy gameplay over and over. So what could they do, right? Well, PoE, 10 plus years of content, so it's pretty unfair to compare, I guess. Last Epoch, I feel like they're going to start coming out with a lot of content, so this isn't going to be as much of an issue. But what LE could do, Pinnacle bosses, which it sounds like they already have plans for, Pinnacle bosses could do things like drop uniques with LP2+. That would be, pretty interesting. Chase items. I feel like the reason PoE is so successful is because, like, there are a lot of leagues where people start the league and the first thing they want to do is just grind nonstop until they get a Mage Blood or a Headhunter, because this is, like, completely gameplay altering type of items. Your build is not even the same as before when you equip a Mage Blood or a Headhunter, and there just really isn't something like this in other ARPGs. It is a really, really important thing in my opinion. Like you could argue, well, there's a really strong unique that, once I get like 3 LP on it and 3 different items, it's like 30% more. No, like we're not talking about 30% more damage or like 100% more defense. Like we're talking about items where you are just not even playing the same game as before. Like when Rax, I really enjoyed seeing when he came from D4 to PoE and he was playing a Lightning Arrow, and when he got a Headhunter, he was like, okay, so the game is just not even the same as before anymore. Goes from taking like maybe 2 or 3 minutes to clear a map to 30 seconds because everything is just getting completely obliterated. And you could argue that, well, this makes the game like not fun at this point, but when you have a sandbox ARPG like PoE, that Headhunter, sure, maps are a joke now. I can do higher tier difficult, I can add more difficult content, I can add Delirium, I can add super juiced Wildwood, but that is just one aspect of the game, right? That Headhunter is not going to help you if you want to go do Pinnacle bossing. That Headhunter is not going to help you if you want to go Infinitely Delve. It's not going to help you if you want to go Heist, so maybe you want a Mage Blood at that point, right? Or you want to go do Valdo maps. You want a Mage Blood at that point, not a Headhunter. A Headhunter just min-maxes, and it's a chase item for a specific aspect of the game, and it may make one aspect of the game feel like you've completed it, but you've not completed many other parts of the game, which a Mage Blood would be different for, or different builds in general would be good for, and that causes people to just want to grind so much more, right? And that kind of brings me to my next point, is in-game customability. I feel like monoliths really do need to have some customization. I feel like PoE maps, I hear a lot of people say this, but when Eater and Exarch influence was added to the game, it completely changed everything when it came to mid-game to late-game enjoyability. Because originally, maps just felt pretty empty unless you added, like, even if you actually added, like, packs of monsters from Sextants and Scarabs, it was just kind of, a little bit more monsters, a little bit more juice, a little bit more density. But when you added Eldritch and Eater influence to maps, it really just brought them to life in a whole new way. Because you have these altars that are just basically loot pinatas. I mean, you basically just add a bunch of loot pinatas in your map. It adds so many more monsters, a lot more density. And then when you add Delirium on top of that, you really just feel like the density really gets out of control, and it feels really, really good once you actually have a good build. And I feel like monoliths could use this too, because currently you just kind of speed run through the entire monolith and go to the end if the monsters aren't really worth killing, and most of the time they are not. The ways you could change this is adding like Last Epoch's version of Sextants, like maybe you buy them with favor from like the Circle of Fortune or something, where it adds like 5 packs of monsters in your map. The monsters all each have a 5% chance of dropping an Exalted Wand or maybe like a unique item. There's a lot of ways. It's really infinite, the amount of possibilities that you have, and over time with each cycle, maybe they add a bit more. You could really have something of a sandbox at that point, right? If there's, because currently we have dungeons, we have monoliths, we have arena. Let's say with each cycle, they add a new area that you can go to, maybe like a roguelike, like Heist, or, something like Delve that PoE has, that has some reason. I feel like optional is pretty important, but for some motivator for people to go do it, to distract themselves from, like I said earlier, the infinite ladder that you feel like you're climbing on, right? And to make it really fun. But again, like I said, I have no doubt that this will be a thing. I feel like they're handling Last Epoch pretty well, and so this isn't something, I don't feel like I can like fairly criticize the end game, even though it is a little bit dull at the moment. Now, I know you guys are going to want me to rate the game, even though this isn't really like a typical review. I've left out a lot of stuff like stash tabs, like MTX, like just like the lore and etc. So it feels kind of weird, but I'd probably give the game like an 8 out of 10 overall right now. I think it's definitely because of the lack of endgame, but it has an incredible foundation to definitely be like a 9 or even 10 out of 10 game in the future, just because You have so much character customization, really fun skills. You have great item progression. All that's really missing from this game to just increase to a 9 out of 10 game, I feel like, is just some in-game development, which apparently is planned very soon. So I'm looking forward to that. PoE in comparison, I kind of just have to give it a 10 out of 10 game. For a lot of people, PoE is not a 10 out of 10 game. This is just my personal ranking. A lot of people are going to just love Last Epoch because it's not as complex as PoE, and it's way more complex than something like Diablo. So it's going to be a great game for them, a 9 out of 10 game for them. And I definitely recommend picking it up for if you're that type of player. But obviously, I can't ignore the fact that PoE keeps me entertained for like 3+ months out of a league. There's just an absolutely absurd amount of things to do. Even a lot of the builds that I enjoyed are nerfed to the ground. Some of them literally unplayable. A lot of the crafting that I used to enjoy is gone. I can't deny that the game is in like an amazing state, and there's just so much complexity when it comes to in-game to where like the content is really endless, right? And I would love for other RPGs to reach that point as well for me, because, you know, the more games to play, the better, right? I feel like as a gamer, you should want there to be good games. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Follow me on Twitch if you want to check out me playing the game and discuss further, or just type in the comments below, because I feel like this video will prompt a lot of discussion in the comments, and I'm looking forward to that as well. So I'll see you guys later.